Welcome back to The Key Signature. I'm your host, Brian Morgan. Entering my junior year of high school in the fall of 2002, I found myself totally immersed in the school's band program. By then, I was an experienced member of the school's marching band, pep band, wind ensemble, and jazz band. I'd been taking private lessons once a week with local trombonist Dave Bryan for over 4 years, yet I was still eager for more opportunities to play music. So when a classmate of mine mentioned the new youth jazz program he had just taken part in over the summer, I went home that day determined to sign up. On this episode of The Key Signature, I'll be speaking with musicians Ben and Michelle Medler about the Portland Youth Jazz Orchestra. Pyjo, as it's affectionately known, was founded in 2001 by Ben and Michelle to fill the need for a more serious jazz studies program for young adults in the local community. From what they could see at the time, there was a shortage of band directors in the area who could properly teach the style of music to their students. So I wanted to start by talking about the Portland Youth Jazz Orchestra. You guys have been running now for, it's like 20 years, right?
I think last year was our 20th year, or is it this year? This is one of them.
Yeah, it was 2001. So,
Yep.
but it was the fall of 2001. So that's this year starting now.
With pandemic, all numbering systems are no longer involved.
Yeah, they've all been voided. Could you talk a bit about its origins and what it was like in the first couple of years?
Well, we had just finished up our 4-year degree over at Portland State, Bachelor's of Music, and we had, during our time at Portland State for about 7 years it took us, we were teaching at Wilson High School in the Portland, Oregon area, and kind of that was a whole story in itself, how we got thrown into there. But at the end of our time at PSU, that also was the end of the time at Wilson due to budget cuts and things like that. And we hadn't gotten our full teacher's certification at that point. So we were just trying to figure out what to do. We loved what we were doing, and there were some programs that I knew of up in the Seattle area that were not really happening here. There were a couple things off to the side, but nothing much was like a good big band program was going on. So we just thought, well, let's try this out. While we're going to figure out, are we going to get our teaching certificates, or are we going to go down this path? We definitely want to be professional musicians as well. And it just wound up, we gathered kids together, kind of like an all-state type of a thing. Went hunting for talent and started one band and wound up with 6 pre-pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild transformation over those years. There was one experience that we had prior to Pyjo starting, which may have given us a little bit of an itch. And that was that Mercer Ellington was coming through town to do a special presentation over at the Schnitzer Hall. And kind of at the last second, they decided that they wanted to have a youth band. And one of the band parents over at Wilson High School was on the board that was working on that, and they asked us if we would put together kind of an all-star group to play CJM Blues with Mercer to kind of kickstart off the whole show. And a lot of the people that were in that band we put together now are all professional musicians, so that was really fun to have all that talent in front of us. We were pretty young as well, and to have Mercer in the room was very special. So Pyjo was kind of an easy, if we could do it then, we could do it again and see if we could build it.
And Mercer brought his 16-year-old at that time grandson, Paul, who the last I heard was the person running the Ellington Orchestra.
Oh, wow. Very
So
cool.
that was neat that he was there too.
What were the goals for the program early on?
Well, to give a place that, it would be maybe more serious than a typical high school jazz band. There's, if you want to do this jazz thing and you are lucky enough to have a good director, and in our time, a lot of the band directors had never played in a jazz band, and the experience level was a lot lower just because of the age they were and the fact that jazz bands, stage bands, weren't necessarily in schools, until the 70s and into the 80s. So a lot of those people had not played, they didn't know what they were doing, and they were great directors maybe, but they just didn't get it. So personally, as a high school student, I was looking for something else I could go out and do. And there were camps in the summer, but there was really nothing I could go do during the year that I had found at that time. I think there were a couple things in the cracks. We just thought, well, let's fill that void and try to make that happen for people.
Have those goals changed at all in the last 20 years? Are they basically still the same?
There's two things that I keep hearing back from students and parents. One is that the music feels good, which is, for us, we call it groove mechanics. I'm quite sure back in the first couple of years we didn't call it anything. But the idea, I could get into it for a long time, but the short story is that if you're on stage with musicians, if you're really in the same language set, types of syllables and lengths of sounds and so forth, there's great music to be had, and even gets to a level of personal conversation. You can really be in somebody's living room and having a nice conversation musically when you have groove mechanics in place. So we've always focused on that. And that's actually probably the number one thing that most teachers don't get to do, because it's really complicated. You have to be able to come up with systems that make sense to everybody. And the other thing besides groove mechanics is composition. And I think that probably was in place from the very first session. We did a all Quincy Jones set, and we played over at Mount Hood. And Quincy's music is so beautifully connected between postmodern jazz and traditional jazz, and that's really very easy to make a program out of, and easy for students to learn from. So the composition of Quincy in that case was the theme for that first session, and we got a lot out of that, a lot of melodies and harmonies and things like that that are pretty important.
I would add to that I don't think that goal has changed. That there's a lot of great high school directors and stuff out there now providing more jazz, so that's maybe a little less of a big concern in my mind anyway. But the idea of giving people a deeper experience of music, that want to be serious all together, and grow from that, and just having that connection to each other, it brings them together. It brings the music together. It raises up their values of what they're putting into their music, and just finding the passion.
You're listening to the Medler Septet performing Calypso Sun. We'll be hearing more from the couple's many professional ensembles throughout this episode. Before they founded Pyjo, Michelle and Ben were students at Portland State University. While they worked on their degrees, an opportunity to direct the band program at nearby Wilson High School would give the young musicians valuable experience as teachers and push them towards finding their own way in Portland's music community. How old were the two of you at the time?
I started Wilson at 21, so Pyjo started, I guess, at 28 or 29, something like that.
And I was 19 when we started at Wilson.
Oh my goodness. I remember, I think it was Ben's 30th when I was in the band. 2003, something like that.
I do remember during our first year teaching at Wilson, there was a little kind of a posse of students and said, can we talk to you at lunch? And well, sure. and they came in and they just laid it out for me. They said, this is how the program is supposed to be, and this is how we kind of want to run the show. I was like, I'm 21. I guess we'll try it. So anyway, yeah, we've 7 years at high school was a lot.
It was a great education.
Sure. Were you like artists in residence there? Was that sort of the deal worked out? How did that work?
There was a crisis and they needed a band director, and we were available. So that's kind of how it worked.
A friend of mine was a year younger than me and was in the band, and her dad was a professional bass player in town that was a friend of ours, and we played with some. And he knew that Ben had run a big band at Berkeley School of Music, out of a student-led band, and we had been running a rehearsal band here in town, like once a week or whatever, get together and just read charts. And he's like, hey Ben, can you help me with these horn players? I don't know what to do with them. And so the two of them got some, emergency teaching certificates, and then after those expired, we wound up sticking on.
Sure. It was a blessing to be thrown into the business that quickly. Has led to, I can't even tell you, just a number of opportunities. Nothing that is, financially stable, but things that keep you moving and excited about music. So a great immersion at a very young age.
What were some of the early lessons at Wilson, like for you guys?
Don't be a 20-year-old kid taking a bus full of jazz band kids to Reno by yourself.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
That we took the vice principal with us on the next trip, which was to Disneyland, and then we were once again abandoned when she got the flu.
Oh, geez.
Police all the kids at night.
Yeah. I remember a lesson on, I think it was the third day of school, and I definitely had no idea how to do my job, and I ran into the vice principal in the hallway. She says, "Okay, I'll see you tonight." I said, "What's tonight?" She said, "Tonight's the game, and you need to have a band there, and they need to play Macho Man," and she just went through this big list of tunes, and I had to. I was terrified. I had to say, I don't have a band tonight. We haven't rehearsed those tunes. There's no options. And she goes, "You can do it. You can just throw it together." And I said, "Actually, that's not an option. There's no way." I was so busted. It was a process. Yeah. So the lesson learned there is ask a lot of questions and try to get ahead of stuff that hurts that bad.
When the Medlers and I spoke, the world at large was still coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Their program, like many others, had gone virtual for nearly a year. Attendance shrunk, but Ben and Michelle understood the importance of Pyjo to their city and knew the organization that they had built over 20 years would recover quickly. So the program started with just one band, and it was originally a big band, right?
It has been a big band program consistently until pandemic. At the moment, it's a combo program. It'll go right back to a big band as soon as we can.
So when I joined, I think it was 2003,
Oof.
There were, I know, there were two bands at that point. You're now running, you said it was 6 pre-pandemic?
There was actually 7.
Oh my
So we
goodness.
had 2 combos and 5 big bands. We were, it was awesome. It was really cool. We had teachers on board, which is a delight, and very good teachers too, which is cool. And just kind of got to float throughout the program and watch it grow. And then pandemic, yes, right.
At what point did you have to, I mean, that's so many bands. Like, I know you were running it all, like just the two of you for a long time. At one point, did you have to like look at it and say, okay, we need to measure out this involvement to other directors?
Well, it got to be, we also teach private students, and the hours that students are available from after school till the time they have to go to bed or whatever, there's only so many hours in a week. And so it was just kind of getting into the way of that. For one thing, we just needed hours so we could, have our private students and keep that base. But also, it's just kind of time. Like, we started to train teachers with getting student directors to come up and all that stuff. And then we got back Brian Smith, who was in the very first Pyjo band. He'd come back from working on, I think, his master's degree.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, this is cool. Let's get him in there with the younger kids. And, so Ben worked with him and got him kind of up to speed. And then he was able to do it on his own. And Mika Bruggeman from the Quadrophones, kind of the same type of a thing.
I wanted to say one more thing about the growth of the program, which is that the program itself has changed dozens of times. And it's always been based on the fact that we had 4 drummers instead of 2. So what do you do with the extra kids that want to learn? And all of a sudden you create an ensemble, and you start building from there. Michelle and I took some classes when we were a bit younger in business. But the one thing that's resonated with us forever is that if you have a business that's failing, then you have to rebrand it and re-kickstart it. And you just keep moving that way. And then to be careful to look at failure the right way. Failure is a piece of growth. It's not a true failure. So if you have a class that no longer has a bass player, then you say, okay, how can we be clever about, the people that are still here? Do we go back a class? Do we add a class without a bass player? Those are all choices that we've had to make, usually within 24 hours.
Thank goodness for being improvisers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a hard job, but we absolutely love it.
Get the funk out there. Here we come with the quadrophones. We come to party and bring our tones. Funky, funky is the beat. Get up and dance now to our groovy treat. So hot it sizzles, we don't mess around. Let's get the funk out and burn it all down. Let's get the funk out there. Let's get the funk out everywhere. Get the funk out. Let's get the funk out there. Get the funk out.
That was Get the Funk Out by Michelle Medler's band, the Quadrophones. For the Medlers, it's all about getting the funk out where others can use it. From the beginning, Pyjo has been a conduit for musical knowledge that is passed down from one generation of musicians to the next. The business has grown by getting that knowledge out into the local community and inspiring others to help do the same.
So the idea of sharing information is really important to us. And Michelle and I gathered, it's even hard to measure. We went to this Port Townsend workshop for 10 years, and all these famous musicians just hung out and shared and shared and shared and shared. And when you get that amount of information, you realize how important it is to let it go. You have to keep it moving, because it's not really documented in places. A lot of people who have also shared with those people know what that's like, but you have to make it. It's very infectious. And so we actually had student teachers all the way back from 3rd or 4th year, and they would have a tune, and they would come each week and work on their one tune, whatever that was. But what Michelle was talking about is we actually had some teachers that we gave entire classes to. And that was less about a financial decision or a timing decision, and more about, who could take on this whole thing and learn a bunch from the experience. And Mika Bruggeman actually comes to mind in particular. We wanted her to be part of the program for a couple of years, and waited for her to become available. And when she was, she wanted to learn all the time. So that was cool. I could have an office hour and kind of hang out at the desk, and the band was rehearsing there, and she would turn around and just ask questions when she needed help, knowing about how to do a particular thing. So that's exciting. I mean, that's really, really cool stuff.
You guys, the two of you are sort of continuing that at PSU, am I right? Through it, like a Jazz Techniques for Educators class? Do you find that's very similar to what you've had to do through the Pyjo program, or?
Say the same idea in concept, yes, but it's a really different experience that we're not in front of a band unless we can get them to come over and watch the program a little bit, but to be working with people in action versus sitting in a classroom with future teachers talking about it, it's also really a very cool experience, but it's very different.
It's like putting sardines in a can. It's a lot. Anybody who's taken that class took a bath in information. Every single class had papers and papers and papers and demonstrations. Just there's so much stuff. So we just gave it all out, and hopefully they're doing okay with it.
There are some that do reach back out though and ask for some help. You know, there's one guy from I think the first year that I was involved in that was asking about his set for this year in his current job and whatever. And that's pretty awesome stuff, you know.
That's great. Going back to Pyjo, the program clearly caught the attention of the music community around the city. I know I heard about it through, I think a classmate was in it. It was basically word of mouth. Were you surprised by the way it grew?
I mean, it just felt like kind of a slow, steady grind of just getting out there and doing it, and it didn't necessarily feel like it really grew that fast. So I don't know, maybe not really surprised. It just was
Not surprised.
the work and the word of the way you spread the word through the community, the way it just would grow, that, you know, it always seemed like a bit of a grind. That's the hardest part, is the recruiting, you know, and so yes and no.
It's painful actually to grow the program, because it's not like you do something right on year number 3 that sparks all of a sudden 20 new people in year number 4. It's always reaching out to the people who know students and trying to figure that out. There's a couple things in particular that come to mind that have been really helpful to us. One is that Bill Royston used to be the director for the Portland Jazz Festival, and during those years we had a nice little handshake where he needed performances and we needed performances. And so he would take care of the venue, and it gave us multiple places. I'm sure you did one or two of them. It gave us multiple places to be able to perform, and that's a big deal. And then there was the Muse program, which is, you know, Pyjo doesn't exist without Muse's help. Bryant Allard is the director of that. He's a fantastic trumpet player. And Muse is creates band programs inside of schools that don't have them. And he would feed, you know, we would have concerts together, and he would feed some of those students right through our program. And I can't even, you know, that's just really huge. It's been steady. But at the end of the day, we were trying to, the way that we've gotten a lot of students is that we try to do what's not happening in the schools. We have a lot of respect for how that works in the schools because we did it. The stuff that you do when you're in the public schools is very competitive, and there's a reason for that. And so notes and rhythms and flash and accuracy and things like that become the markers of a good performance. As you know, playing in a professional band, that's mandatory on the first rehearsal. And it's the next 90% of stuff that we were shared with from those great people at Port Townsend that we're trying to teach at Pyjo. And so that's hopefully symbiotic to the high schools. You know, they send kids to us, we send back some stuff that they don't actually have time to deal with. And it's kind of infectious that it goes back and helps with groove and harmony and stuff like that.
And we go out to those schools when possible and give clinics to the directors and try to feed them some different ideas. And sometimes it's the same ideas they maybe have, but the kids listen to somebody else, you know, that's standing in front of them for the day. But that relationship has been really cool too, just to keep, again, giving back and connecting with other teachers and sharing ideas, and then gathering some students that want to be serious and, you know, moving it forward.
That was Grape Crushed by the Shanghai Woolies, another one of Ben and Michelle's wonderful ensembles. Somewhere on a back street in the green-gray West Hills of Portland, Oregon, was a narrow, dimly lit staircase. This staircase led up to an attic that held a certain sort of magic to a 16-year-old aspiring trombonist who was in love with jazz. The original Pyjo space was a place where teenagers like myself met up once a week to take a deep, challenging dive into music. It was really exciting to walk up those steps and wonder, what am I going to learn today? I'm glad you mentioned Muse. We used to meet in the Muse office, I think, over on the West Slope.
Yes, that's right.
Something like that.
Yep.
And it was very...
Part of helping us get started.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it was like this cramped space. It felt like it was in an attic or something.
It was in an attic.
But it was enough room to host, 5 saxophones, drums, bass, 4 trombones, 4 trumpets. Like, it was enough
A lot of
space.
great music in that room.
Yeah, a lot of great. And it was such a... it was like an adventure for a teenager like me, like walking up those steps into this, like, it was like a secret, like that this like program was hidden up there. You know what I mean?
That is really cool.
You walked up these mystery stairs and then suddenly you were in this, jazz. Yeah.
With the smell of cat boxes. The cat rescue that was below us.
Yeah.
That was the final straw when the students started to notice that the cat room was downstairs. Time to go.
You've since moved to the Burlingame space, which is a different neighborhood in the West Hills. Can you talk a little bit about the transition, like other than the smell of cats, like what made you decide to move into your own like dedicated space?
The place we went in between was in downtown Tigard, and the Muse program had moved there, and so we went with them. And that was cool because they set up a room. It was a built performance room, and the location wasn't great, but the room was. And then there was a day when a limo pulled up, and then the building was sold, and we had 30 days to get out.
I think we've been there, like 2 seasons?
2 seasons, yeah.
Oh, man.
2 seasons in Tigard. And so this limo pulls up, and then all of a sudden we had 30 days, and our program was spread over 3 or 4 days during the week. So the way that we originally started prior to being with Muse was in schools, and that wasn't going to work. You can't tie down 4 evenings and equipment and all that stuff. So we started looking for our own place, and it was really frustrating. We went out day after day after day, and everything was too expensive and not in great places. And we had given up one day and stopped and had dinner over at a place called Chez Jose in Burlingame. And Michelle looks across the street and says, "That place says for rent." And that ended up being the Burlingame space. And the landlord is very kind with the amount of money and takes care of the place. And so we've built it up. We have soundproofing in there and a recording system and a separate room for people to do smaller classes. It's really awesome over there.
Yeah, it's a really great space, especially what you've done with it. It's like, looking at it from the front, I think you're next to like, is it a furniture store or something like that? I'm not sure
It's currently a paint store.
Yeah.
Finishes, fine finishes.
So it looks like a retail, storefront, but again, you walk in and it's like this great space that's...
So the lesson learned here is that we need to make it a secret entrance.
Or secret.
Yeah, or like a password or something.
Oh, we could make a tunnel.
Yeah.
From the parking lot.
Yeah. From the yeah, right. Yeah. Go down, it comes up.
You were just listening to Ben, Michelle, and a band's worth of Pyjo students on a virtual recording they put together during the pandemic. The song is entitled Limbo Blues. Between many Pyjo classes, summer camps, clinics, and private lessons, the Medlers are a constant inspiration to countless young musicians in Portland. Their own inspirations came from different experiences growing up. So, I wanted to talk to you guys about your early influences. This question is for both of you. Did you have, as like young kids, early on, what was the music environment like early in your childhood growing up? Was there a certain kind of music coming over the radio? For me, it was classic rock in the car with my dad, and
Love that.
a big band, KMHD in the minivan with mom, So what was it for you guys?
Well, I was just posting somewhere on a friend's page about how I used to think that the Beach Boys lived in the little 8-track cassette tape that my parents had when I was like 3. I remember where I lived at the time, so I couldn't have been, maybe I was 4, but just barely. And I really thought they lived in there, and I was a little confused that how could they get in the radio in the car too, And so the music was always on in my house, pretty much night and day. Maybe the TV instead, but there was music, the radio's going, Saturday morning, and it would change between, sometimes it was jazz, and mostly it was kind of 50s rock or the soft rock kind of stuff. But they were also into music, like both my parents, they would have quirky albums like the Switched On Bach, where he did Bach on an organ or something, and it, just the quirky things, and they were into it, and they introduced me to a lot of really good music. And then later, as I got a little older, I wanted to play saxophone because the radio was on, and I knew I wanted to get into music somehow. I was kind of like infatuated with the radio. If they would have those things where you could call in, I'd do that. I called in on my dad's 40th birthday and told the world he was 40, and he kind of never forgave me for that, And
Whoops.
so I know that Glenn Frey's "You Belong to the City" was popular, and
yeah.
had the big saxophone feature intro. And I said, that's the instrument that I want to play. And I was in 3rd grade, and we couldn't join band till 5th grade. So I played violin for a year in 4th grade just to learn something about music. My parents didn't know about like, oh, you could go get a saxophone and take some lessons or something. They didn't know anything about that. So I did the violin and the saxophone. I was just infatuated by it. Had to fight my way to not have to start on clarinet and do it. So I wanted to start on the saxophone. I already waited a year.
You knew.
And then in 5th grade, we had moved from the Seattle area here, and I got a tenor because the place they wanted to rent from, that's what they had in stock at that weird time of the year. And so that was kind of fun. It was kind of bigger than me. There's a funny picture I have to get out there sometime of that. But anyway, we found this band of like 50s rock music, that Johnny Limbo and the Lugnuts. They're still going strong here in this town. And my parents really liked it. They're a great show. They would go get dressed up in costumes.
Really good.
Come out and sing the song dressed as the artist that they were, singing about. Or sometimes it was funny. They actually do the Stop in the Name of Love dressed in drag. It was just a great band. And we started going to so many shows that we made friends. And then I was allowed to be backstage whenever I wanted to. I just get back there and hang out with the stage manager, help where I could. Sold merch for the band, and just got to see the business from inside, and that led to, they would take me to a lot of shows, different things, wherever you could go as a minor, and we would go. And from there, the Mount Hood Jazz Festival kind of kicked in seventh grade. I started going to that camp that was attached to that, which became later the Mel Brown camp. He was always in charge of the Mount Hood one. And so that was such a huge experience for me. Every summer for a week, you show up at like 2 full weekends and then the week in between. So it was either the first weekend was the Mount Hood Jazz Festival, and you show up at the very beginning and you stay all day for all 3 days, and then you have camp for a week.
Perfect.
And so you've been exposed to all this jazz, and then you learn about it.
They inspire you first, and then you get to learn. Yeah.
And some of the years it was the other way around. You show up and then you have the camp the music is at the end of the camp. So I think they like to do it the other way, but whatever they needed to do for the buildings and stuff. So that was a huge thing. And that's where he and I met each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then he told me about this camp that we were talking about up at Port Townsend, run by Centrum, and it was Bud Shank's jazz workshop. Now it's John Clayton's workshop, and that still goes.
Just a huge gift.
And those two places were, I had a great private teacher, Gary Harris, who was he is still like a very well-rounded player. I could go see his saxophone quartet play. They would rehearse in the studio, and he'd invite his students to come watch him rehearse if they wanted. And so I got to see that, and then I get to see him go play in an African band with Obo Addy, who is a king in Ghana.
Oh, I miss Obo, yeah.
Yeah. And to see a lot of that stuff, and to see him play jazz gigs, or he'd be playing rock somewhere, playing a horn section, and it was just a great example, So I guess I'll let you take over. You have a whole different story.
It is very different. So I'm adopted, and in my adoption papers, there was mention of musical heritage. It wasn't exactly accurate at that particular time, but the general idea was that my adoptive parents got the message that I had some lineage. What's cool about that is that my father that adopted me is from here in Portland, Oregon, and he is the son of 2 musicians. And so without getting into too many details, he knew how important it was to set up opportunities for me. And so I guess the big thing that I want to say is that I'm probably born into music regardless of how anything went down. It seems to spark me pretty regularly and from a pretty early age. But as we've taught over the years, it's become very clear that with and without support, music does different things. And so I've been very lucky. The family that I grew up with gave me every opportunity that I can possibly think of musically. And I'm not sure that I practiced a whole lot in the early years, which, I have some guilt about, but I've certainly done a lot with it since. And once it was, out of the house and looking for big inspirations, there are 3 actually teachers that have really gotten me to think about music more than notes and rhythms. So I would say brain science, or I would say the psychology of, or maybe the authenticity of music. They all kind of lead in the same direction. But Phil Wilson was my private teacher in high school. And then I spent 2 years at Berklee College of Music, where he continued to be my teacher there. That's musical father number 1. During the summers at Port Townsend, Jigs Wiggum was the instructor. And over the years, each year I kept paying attention more and more, and I think he caught that. And he started giving me some information that just really helpful. He has such a beautiful way of seeing the honesty of what a student needs to deal with, and getting right to the point, and then covering it with love so that you don't feel bad about it, and that's just huge psychology stuff. So that's musical father number 2. And then I had a teacher while I was at Portland State University, not a trombonist, but a pianist by the name of Randy Porter. And Randy is so very interesting to me, and he was so responsible with my education. And I think I studied for about a year with him. But the idea being is that I would do the work for him and bring it in and feel a little exhausted and overwhelmed by the project. And just within a moment or two, he'd say, well, had you thought about doing this with it? Always some kind of a left turn to bring more out of the project, which is really the thing that we try to do at Pyjo. We're trying to get people away from notes and rhythms and get them into what music really is, which is endless. It's an art form that has so many interpretations and so much interesting culture, dialect, and development and origin. Just so many valuable things. So for me, like I said, music I think has always been in me. As a multi-instrumentalist, it just keeps sparking to me on different instruments. But I'm pretty sure that very little of what I've got to do over the last number of years would be available to me without my adoptive parents and Chigs and Phil and Randy. Very important people. And other people.
I'm going to add to your story. You didn't mention that you grew up in your church choir, and that director was huge as well. I know for his development. I mean, to come to, this is pre-trombone that you were singing in choir and doing solos and things like that, and that coming to the trombone and later the trumpet with the voice is a huge gift. The ear training. I mean, I remember when I met him, he was 19 and he came from across town on the bus. And while he was on the bus, he was transcribing some solo. I don't know what the solo was, but you wanted to sit down right away at the piano or whatever and figure out if you got it right.
Which I did.
And you said you had gotten like whatever, your 30% or something, if I remember you saying, but wherever you had gotten off, it was correct, but you just got off on an interval somewhere.
Yep.
And I just was blown away that you could do that. When as a 16-year-old kid, I was struggling with transcribing, trying to bite off John Coltrane solos as my first attempts.
Still too hard.
Well, maybe for anyway. Yeah. So, but your vocal thing.
That was 8 hours a week for 8 years. So a huge piece, actually. There's, endless teachers that we've been around and people who have shared with us. We're very grateful, and Pyjo goes out of its way to be to turn that back around. It's really important that we are sending that information forward, because what else is it good for? It's good. You got to do something with it.
Here is For Phil by Ben Medler's Trombone Encounters. These days, with digital album releases, streaming platforms, and a dwindling supply of live venues, local music scenes across the country are struggling to survive. More than ever, Pyjo's influence is needed to inspire young artists and music lovers to get out there and support their local communities. This is for both of you, has the music community changed at all since you arrived? The scene in Portland, what was it like when you first got here, and has it evolved at all in the last 20 years?
Right?
Well, I think it's changed greatly just maybe over the last 5 years or so, or maybe kind of slowly over 10. Like when you were around in Pyjo, there were still big band gigs that you could go out, a couple nights a week, and somebody, if you're in the connections, like somebody will call and go, "Hey Michelle, we need a sax player for this big band over here, and can you come tonight?" And you may or may not be gigging it might be a rehearsal band, it might be a gig, it might be something in a bar, you're maybe not getting paid, but there were places to go work on your sight reading and section playing, just all of that stuff, because the audience for big band was the greatest generation, and they were still coming out once in a while and swing dancing, and that has definitely died off over time. There are big bands here and there in the pockets, but those calls don't come around for people. There's nowhere to send our Pyjo students, where they should be doing that at age 19 in their 20s and stuff like that, you know.
I heard 2 or 3 years ago from one of the old timers. He said in the 70s he was working 35 times a month playing third trombone.
Oh my
So
goodness.
that's
Yeah,
been
wow.
a steady decline, but not just the big band thing. That's part of the scene, but the whole scene in Portland, in the like late 80s and early 90s. I mean, 90s grunge, Northwest. The bar scenes were crazy, and all sorts of music. We had a thing called the Mayor's Ball, that was put on at once a year, and you could be in the big Memorial Coliseum. They have basement rooms. They have the main, like, where they would play hockey or whatever, arena, and then they had all kinds of rooms all over the place for conventions and things, and they would fill that with every style of music. You could go over here and see country music. You could go downstairs and see jazz, and then there's the avant-garde jazz next door. There was like a punk scene. You could go in a mosh pit. You know, that was like what I felt like our city was. You know, you could go out any night of the week and see there's music everywhere. And it's just like the last 5 years, the clubs have scene has taken a huge hit. You know, I know it's just difficult. There are not very many venues. At the end, before the pandemic, like kind of one of the last venues for acts that were big, you know, like I play in a 10-piece salsa band. The last of those like kind of venues where you're not totally crammed together or renting a theater closed, you know, and so I'm hoping that some of that changes after we get back to normal again. But the scene has definitely dwindled.
There's an upside, but it's unpredictable. The upside is that at the school systems, most larger programs have 2 jazz bands. So that's not going to be true this particular year because of pandemic. But before pandemic, all the bigger programs had 2 jazz bands. When you compare that to the 80s, most programs didn't have jazz bands, or they had part-time jazz bands that had a season. So the number of students that are learning about the music is way higher than it ever has been, and that's quite encouraging. We just don't know if and when that turns into anything, you know, scene related. But the way I've always felt about a scene is that the more musicians that are trying to create performances, the better the scene does. You know, in theory, if everybody, you know, put $1,000 on the table for the year and said, if I lose all my money for the gig, that's my contribution. But if everyone kind of hired a band and found a cafe up to a huge venue to put one gig on a year, everyone would be working, you know. So it could turn as fast as media wants it to turn. If this is really a digital kind of an issue, where so much of our energy, just as a society, is on the screen and not in person, and perhaps, always looking for the bright side, but perhaps post-pandemic, people are tired of looking at screens, right?
Yeah.
And they get out and want to see more.
The Portland Youth Jazz Orchestra is going strong today in 2024, with 5 ensembles being offered for a variety of ages and skill levels. Ben and Michelle are always looking for new ways to teach, and the organization is invaluable to students young and old looking for a place to communicate and express themselves on a deeper level. Whether you live in the Portland area or are listening from afar, if you are interested in learning about jazz and music education, they are ready to impart their knowledge to you.
The most valuable thing is that for anyone trying to learn about jazz education or just the psychology of music, you could just reach out to us. There's, you know, one way or the other, there's going to be some cool stuff to talk about. That email could be info at pyjo.com. That gets you to our Portland Youth Jazz Orchestra site. and we can just start a conversation that way. But Michelle and I teach almost all of the instruments, so anybody who's just wanting to learn about music in general, we're well prepared to do that. As far as seeing us live, we just don't have regular gigs. So just to be exposed to our music, we have lots of videos on YouTube. Keep searching under Medler and music or jazz or something like that. You'll find a lot of us out there.
And there's things from my quartet just under Michelle Medler or Michelle Medler Quartet out there on, the Spotify's and iTunes and Amazon places, everywhere you shop for those things. And he has albums out under his name as well. And same with the Quadraphones. We do have a newer album with the Quadraphone Sax Quartet where composer Andrew Durkin, who did the Industrial Jazz Orchestra, he either adapted some big band charts and also wrote, it's all his music, but both of those things, and turned it into sax quartet pieces. And we came out with an album called Five Pointed Star, and that's out on Bandcamp. I think you can get that in other places too, but there's a site on Bandcamp for that. And so that's kind of the newest thing. Both of us have in the works future albums under our own names, just
lots of stuff
plugging
coming
away.
Many irons in the fire.
Yeah, there's just so many. That's and then I should say, just in case somebody is watching this that is independently wealthy, if you want to produce one of our records, give us a call.
Yeah,
we're ready to go.
100%.
we're just waiting to save money on our own. So, but we have a big picture. Small is that we really enjoy music, and we have over the years had to fight pretty hard, but have found many crafty ways to keep it moving for us, and we're proud about that. It's been a good journey so far.
And I would add that for anyone that's kind of looking to reach out, we would be open to an online Pyjo situation, is some kind of online learning, so that people from outside of the Portland area could participate. And if we had enough interest, then we would do it. So reach out if that's something that you are interested in.
Plugs done.
Plugs, many plugs. Well, Ben and Michelle, thank you so much for talking with me today. It was really good to see you.
Likewise.
It's been inspiring. Thank you once again for tuning in to The Key Signature. I've been your host, Brian Morgan. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the show, and do encourage others to check it out. We'll be back with another episode before you know it. See you then.